Hispanic origin.
To dive a little deeper into this topic, we're joined by ESPN columnist Howard Bryant, ESPN contributor Will Cain, and Dr. Todd Boyd, professor of pop culture and race at USC. Okay, gentlemen, by now we've seen the video of Bennett being handcuffed. We've heard from him, the Vegas police, Roger Goodell. Dr. Boyd, let me start with you. How do you think this incident will affect public support for the issues that Bennett is trying to bring more attention to, especially racial profiling and police brutality?
Well, you know, there's some people perhaps who need to be convinced that this issue that has been a long-standing issue in our society is real. And there are other people who know it. Either they've experienced it or someone close to them has experienced it, or they're knowledgeable about such things and not uncomfortable embracing the truth. You know, anytime you have a high-profile figure like Michael Bennett, particularly with his activism of late, something like this happening, it's going to get a lot of attention. But, you know, you don't need Michael Bennett to demonstrate that these are serious issues that have been with us for quite some time.
Well, let me point this question to you now. What role, if any, should the NFL play in addressing the social concerns of its players, particularly when some players are affected by them directly?
Well, I think the issue has to do with the fact that African Americans have been in this position for a long time. You have a number of African American players in the NFL. Many of them have been saying this is an issue. Colin Kaepernick is currently unemployed for protesting about this very issue. So it's kind of ironic that the person most visibly connected with the protest, now that Kaepernick's not in the league, Bennett, would be a victim of the sort of things that Kaepernick was trying to bring attention to beginning last year.
And now, gentlemen,
Will Cain, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I started there for a minute. I thought you guys were talking to me. But just to respond there, Lisa, to your question, whether or not the NFL should be playing a role at this point, I think the answer is no. And the at this point carries all the weight. I guess I feel like, you know, Dr. Boyd talks about this being an issue, and there's no denying the existence of an issue. But the responsible question to ask at this point is whether or not that issue played a role in Michael Bennett's situation. And I feel like there's been an incredible and irresponsible rush to judgment on behalf of the NFL fans, at least a big contingent. The NFL, for that matter, we've heard Roger Goodell and Pete Carroll speak out, and certainly, and most importantly, on behalf of the media. In the past 24 hours, I've seen people mock the idea of asking for proof, mock the idea that there can be two stories, suggest that if you question one side of the story, you're calling Michael Bennett a liar. And if you're calling him a liar, there must be some kind of racial animus behind that. I didn't think that's what we did here. I thought we asked skeptical questions, hard questions. I thought we didn't take one side of a story. I thought we didn't take partial video clips and extrapolate into larger causes that this is an illustration of that. That's not our role. That's not responsibility. I don't sit here today and deny what Dr. Boyd just said, that these are issues that exist in our society. But any responsible person should be asking today, did Michael Bennett's situation reflect it? Is this an example of racial bias within law enforcement? And right now, there is no responsible answer to that question.
Howard Bryant.
Well, I actually think the responsible thing is to say, why do you need Michael Bennett? Will, if you already say that this is an issue and you don't deny that it's an issue, then why are we talking about Michael Bennett in the first place? You don't need necessarily him to talk about this. And I do think that the NFL has to have some sort of comment on this, because the NFL has embedded a lot of these issues into the game. The players are on the field discussing this. The league is 65 to 70% African American. At some point, you know, we live in an incredibly divisive time right now where the issues are in the game. The police are on the field in terms of being a part of the ceremony along with military. You have these issues. We can't deny them. And so I think that at some point, when you have, whether it's, you know, Malcolm Jenkins or Michael Bennett or Colin Kaepernick or Marcus Peters, and the players are out there, at some point, if we're going to have these issues be on the field as they are, then I think everyone's got to discuss them. You don't need Michael Bennett to talk about this.
But, Howard, that is why we're talking about it today. We're talking about it because Michael Bennett had an incident that he talked about on Instagram.
No, that's the reason why we're talking about it Yes, but that's the reason why we're talking about it today, not the reason that we've been talking about it for however many years.
But if I may, Howard, the larger issues have to be discussed within the context of facts. And in this situation, as it exists right now, I don't deny that racial animus actually, or not racial animus, but racial bias plays a role probably in almost every human interaction, much less law enforcement. But the question is, did it play a role with Michael Bennett's situation? And as the Las Vegas PD just said right now, as of now, and from what I hear, there's 126 videos of this incident. As of right now, there's no evidence that it did play a role. Michael Bennett ran from a supposed active shooter situation. And that is the reasonable suspicion that Las Vegas PD is saying they used to put him on the ground.
Version of the story.
Well, yes, but that's exactly right. That's their version. But the whole point is we should be skeptical of everyone's version and withhold judgment, not rush to this being an example.
And use that as fact.
I'm sorry?
You just embraced the cops' version of the story and presented that as fact. You were not skeptical of it. You've taken that as though it's true.
That's not true, Dr. Boyd.
Skeptical. You just did it.
How did I do that?
Gentlemen, can I just interject?
You said he ran. You talked about he jumped over a barrier. This is what the cop said.
I didn't say that. Michael Bennett said he ran. I'm telling you this, and I'm not calling Michael Bennett a liar, and I'm not suggesting Las Vegas PD is above reproach. But what I'm telling you is, if we're going to use this as an example to have a larger discussion, a warranted discussion, as Dr. Bryant just said as well, Howard Bryant just said as well, if we're going to have this as an example of a larger discussion, we might bear in mind that the facts of this specific incident matter, and we don't have them yet.
Maybe you feel as though you need more proof, but other people who've been through this sort of thing, who know people who've been through this sort of thing, you don't need continual proof. I can document history going back a long way to prove examples like this over and over again. Obviously, this is an individual incident, but the point of the fact is this has been going on in America for quite some time. People have brought attention to it. They're dismissed. They're ridiculed. They're questioned. And, you are providing skepticism as well. That's fine for you. But if you're someone who's been affected by this or could be affected by this, maybe you don't need all this extra proof because the proof has been there for a long time.
I'm sorry. Me suggesting.
Well, it's not even a question of not necessarily. It's not a question of not needing more proof. There's plenty of information out there if you want to look for it. There's a 600-page report released by the Justice Department last year about police killings. It's not as if you need the incident with Michael Bennett to say, oh, well, maybe we need to talk about this. I mean, the incidents are out there. And I agree with you, Will, at some point that we don't have enough information. And by the way, when we talk about not having enough information, that also includes Las Vegas PD because their investigation is not complete. So it's not one or the other. Everyone's got to get more information on this. But on the actual issue that has had players out there protesting for the last couple of years, I think that there's plenty of information out there. The matter is whether or not you actually want to pay attention to it.
But as of right now, Michael Bennett's situation is being held up as a symbol of the greater problems. Michael Bennett's situation is being held up as the example of what Colin Kaepernick has been talking about. And what I'm telling you is it's a premature judgment to use that as a symbol. And Dr. Boyd, when I say that, that's not a denial of your existence, your experience, or anyone's experience, or as Howard just pointed out, larger statistics, although each individual situation has to be judged on its own facts and its own merits. And if we run down a path of using a situation, hypothetically Michael Bennett's, that doesn't bear out in the end, it will not do the larger discussion any favors. In fact, it will undercut it all the way through the discussion.
Well, I think there are a lot of people who would like for this to go beyond discussion and to take the form of action and ultimately to have this sort of thing stop. It's not just about having continual discussions. I understand your point. I mean, there's still an investigation and information will be revealed and it may confirm what I'm saying. It may contradict what I'm saying. I guess we'll find out. The point I'm making, and I think Howard Bryant made the same point, whether this is the case with Michael Bennett or not, there's a number of other cases that have been going on for a long time. This is not new. This didn't start in the last few years. And so for some people who want to look at each incident individually as opposed to looking at a pattern, perhaps they want, more information. For other people, this is confirmation of something you've either been through or known for quite some time. It depends on your perspective. It depends on who you are. I can appreciate your skepticism. I'm not as skeptical because I've been in that situation. I know a number of other people who've been in that situation as well. I think it's also ironic when you look at the fact that Bennett is very visible. He's connected to this issue in the NFL. This has been a point of discussion as it's pertained to Kaepernick as of late, and he would be the one put in this same situation that guys are protesting about. You can ask for more information, and I think that's fine, and more information is always better than less information, but at the same time, it's not as though we need to act like this is something that just happened out of the blue that's never, ever happened before, and we need every bit of evidence before we can decide accordingly. It's part of a larger pattern, and it looks very similar to a lot of things that have happened recently and things that have been going on in America for quite some time, and the discomfort with talking about it doesn't change the fact that for a lot of people this is very real, and it was very real for Michael Bennett in Las Vegas when this happened to him 10 days or so ago.
Gentlemen, I want to get your response to one more issue because we're running out of time here, but a very thorough discussion here. Howard, I'm going to start with you. Now that we've seen Michael Bennett follow in the footsteps of Colin Kaepernick, we've seen Eric Reed, we've seen Malcolm Jenkins, countless other players with the Cleveland Browns following those footsteps. What effect do you think this particular incident with Michael Bennett will have on other players in the NFL, Howard, as we start the week 1 coming up tonight? I believe we lost Howard. Will, what do you think? Do you think you'll see other players from the NFL fall in?
Do I think we'll see other players follow Colin Kaepernick's lead in protesting the national anthem? Yes. I think that we will have broadened and varied reasons for their protest. Will that necessarily support Kaepernick's protest?
No, I'm talking about Michael Bennett specifically, though, Will. Now that Michael Bennett has been a victim of what he says is an issue throughout the country, do you think other players will fall in line with him because someone they know directly has also experienced it?
Possibly. I think, Michael, we were seeing more and more players do this anyway, from 12 players with the Cleveland Browns to Malcolm Jenkins and Chris Long supporting Malcolm in Philadelphia. I'll tell you this. I will say this. However many guys do it, Michael, I hope that more do it the way that Malcolm Jenkins has done it in Philadelphia, where he provided a very specific issue that he hoped to see solutions towards and talked about actually legislation that he wanted to see changed. I think protest without specifics, protest without action is theater. It's not attempting to accomplish real change.
Protest is action.
Howard?
Yeah, well, I think one of the bigger issues that's taken place on this, too, is what's the NFL going to do? Because I think that their statement yesterday has sort of boxed them in to having to deal with a very difficult issue. And the issue is one that they really, I don't think they can win. If they start getting involved in this at the level that it needs to be involved in, then they're going to run afoul of the unions that are already deciding to, the police unions that are deciding to withhold service to players that, or to teams that have players that protest. I think this is a very difficult issue, and it's one of the reasons why you wonder if the sports leagues need to be involved in this. I think it's the players that express themselves, but when the leagues become embedded in this too, now you start going down a place where where you've got politics in the middle of your game, and there's no way out.
The depths of this conversation extend far and beyond. I do just want to leave us out with this. Bennett's attorney did speak yesterday, John Burris. Speaking with Como News in Seattle, said race was not a factor in the arrest, but lack of probable cause was, which would be the basis of any potential civil rights lawsuit as they move forward. It's the first that we had heard from his attorney. That's his statement.
Really quick, Lisa, for what it's worth, that's incorrect. Probable cause is not necessary for detainment. Reasonable suspicion is. It's a lower standard.
Will Cain, Howard Bryant, Dr. Todd Boyd, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation regarding Michael Bennett's incident in Las Vegas.